Will we start?
Mitchell, please, you can go ahead now.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I said can we start, and I wasn't sure. Didn't hear anything back. My apologies. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Rowell Winters, and I'm the interim chair of the Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee. So we will call the meeting, have the meeting called to order at 4:33 by my clock. I'll start our meeting off today with a land acknowledgement. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in its territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. As a standard of virtual meetings, we'll begin with a roll call to make sure that everyone's audiovisuals is working. Hopefully I'll get, people stumble over my name, so I'm very sensitive about other people's names, and I'm not sure that I'm going to get everyone right, but we have Councillor Laura White.
Good evening, everybody. Hi.
We have regrets from Vice Chair Ted Doan. We have Ryan Frizzle.
Yep, I'm here.
Great. And next name, can someone help me with the pronunciation?
Mui.
Mui.
Muyu. Hi, everyone.
Sorry, Muyu. And how do you pronounce your last name? Sorry, Muyu.
Xia.
Xia?
Yeah.
Miyu Xia, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't like to mispronounce names. Thank you for being here. Dominique Johns.
Here.
Diana Alexis, is that correct?
It's pronounced Dinah. Yeah.
Dinah Alexis. Elena Solimano.
Elena Solimano. Yes.
Elena Solimano, thank you. And Michelle Rowell Winters, that's me. Thanks, everyone. We'll now move on to our agenda for today's meeting. So I guess the first thing will be approval of minutes. I'll ask for any edits to the minutes of September 18th. And if there are none, I'd invite somebody to move to have the approval of these minutes.
I'll move that.
Okay. Does so because I'm following along with the script, so someone else is looking after who nominated. So the motion has been moved by.
Sorry, Mitchell, I have to have a seconder for that.
Okay.
And I will second it. Dinah.
Okay. I'll now call for questions. All those in favor of say aye or raise of hands or for approval of the meeting minutes. Are we going to get some? I can't see you since I'm not reading from the script, so I don't know if everyone has their hands up or if I'm not hearing any ayes.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Oppose? The motion's been carried. Let's see. So now we need to go to order of business and approval of additions and deletions. We'll now move into the approval of the order of business for today's meeting. Our legislative assistant, are there any changes to today's agenda?
No changes to today's agenda.
Thank you very much for being so supportive through this process with me. It's my first time. And to our committee members, is there any changes to today's agenda?
No, Michelle, Laura,
Yes?
I was just going to ask, there's other people showing up on our list. As far as, I don't know how this normally works. Do we get everyone to say hello or just some people are observing or what?
Okay, thank you, Councillor White. Other people there are the staffs that will need to speak to the items on the agenda.
Okay.
So
they
once we
don't go
get
on the list of attendees or?
yeah, so once we get to their item, they will introduce themselves.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so where are we? Let's see.
Yeah, we have the approval of the order of the business.
Right. So we now move on to the approval of the order of business. You had said that sorry, Clark had advised me that there were no changes. The committee members, are there any changes in today's agenda? I'll take the silence as a no. I'll invite a member of the committee to move for the following motion, that the agenda be approved as presented.
I can move that. Laura?
The motion's been moved by Laura, sorry,
Okay.
Laura, and seconded by,
I could do that.
thank you,
Dominique.
Dominique. Now call for the question. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hands. Again, thank you. I appreciate that. It's like I can't see you all when I'm reading from the script. Oppose? The motion's been carried. So we're told that we have no business arising out of the last minutes. So maybe we can do the call for declaration of conflict of interests. I will now ask if anyone has a conflict of interest to declare as a result of an item on today's agenda. Okay, I'm not hearing any declarations of conflict of interest, so we can move on, I guess. Correspondence, petitions, delegations. To our clerk, has any correspondence been received?
No correspondence received from the clerk's office.
Thank you so much. To our clerk, are there any petitions to be presented?
No petitions also received from the clerk's office.
Thank you so much. I guess we will move on now to information items being brought forward. There's none, so we'll move on to reports. First one from the operations update. I'll ask Ian Kennedy, Supervisor Major Parks West, to speak to Point Pleasant Park about the operations memo that was circulated to members.
Hi, everybody. Ian Kennedy, Supervisor of Major Parks. Thanks to all the new members for being here today and the new counselor. Yeah, I'm going to just go ahead with the operations update. And if you were in the orientation, we'll just have a Q&A and kind of open opportunity for you to ask any questions after that. I guess not a huge update from the operations update given in the last meeting. This is kind of a very transitionary lull period, both at the park and in Parks and Rec. We're prepping for winter, so kind of gearing down for and maneuvering our focus towards that. A majority of what we've been doing the last 3 to 4 weeks is blowing leaves. It is quite a large forest area, so leaves fall quite rapidly, and that's essential to maintaining the drainage of the roads, with them being dirt roads and the ditches being the only drainage. It's kind of a constant everyday thing to keep that clear. So that's been taking up most of our time. The forest thinning project was completed at the end of October, which went quite well. They were done, and the contractor came in and finished that in about 2.5 weeks, which was great because they had slated for longer. Other updates in terms of operations, like I said, we're in a lull period, both operationally and staff-wise. Our seasonal staff and student staff are now gone as of the end of October. So we've gone down from 10 plus staff to only 5. But with that, we've acquired some new equipment. We recently acquired a brand new vehicle for snow removal, which is great. We've been short equipment for some time, but specifically so for winter snow removal. So we're pretty geared up in that regard for this winter. And as of today, we also received another new piece of equipment, a trackless utility vehicle, which will also help with our winter snow removal operations. On the topic of snow removal, in the next week or two, we will start closing off some of the side trails that are the ones that aren't main roads, more of the walking trails. Not closing them off to access, but we'll be putting up barricades and signage notifying people that those don't have winter maintenance, which is that's something we do every year and have done for decades. And we'll be kind of phasing the whole park into what it will look like for the next few months. Other than that, we're still continuing, even with the thinning project, we're still continuing to remove invasive species. We're removing a lot of pines from the park. They seem to be, they don't have a disease, but they seem to be not faring very well. And we can't really find answers for that, but we're removing a lot of those for safety reasons. With the rainy season and the rain the last few weeks, we've been monitoring some of the culverts we installed in the summer. And those are proven to be quite effective, which is great because some of the ones we replaced were persistent drainage issues. So having those out of the way is, great. Otherwise, in terms of regular operations, we're just kind of motoring along with normal tasks, awaiting the whatever winter has to bring our way, hoping not too bad, but and we've also fared quite well this year and last year. We haven't really seen, knock on wood, much hurricane related weather, but there's still time for that, so we shall see. If anyone has any questions, feel free.
I have a question, Ian. I'm new. This is my first day on the advisory committee, and I have a question about under whose purview would be like the new playground that's being built there. Is that something under your department, or who
that would be under parks as a whole, but that would be under we have a separate playgrounds division, so they would be in charge of repairing and maintaining that. I guess from my perspective and standpoint, it would just become another park amenity, but the responsibility and I guess maintenance of that would fall under playgrounds and a separate department in parks.
So that must be fairly tricky to coordinate the operations because there's vegetation and things to deal with that surround that little playground.
Yeah, like it'll it's in a separate department, but the person overseeing that, like, we would still be overseeing the vegetation around it, but the maintenance to the structure itself would be taken on by another department, which is just a colleague of mine who runs that department. But prior to installation, they will be discussing with me like any changes that do need to be made. But structural and physical maintenance and responsibility for that, it falls on playgrounds, where if you're referring to maintaining the vegetation, like that would be on my staff.
Okay.
If we could step back for a moment, and we'll officially turn it over to the committee for questions by using a speakers list. Thanks, Ian. And I think the councillor answered a question I was going to ask, but we'll start with Ryan. Any questions?
No questions today. Thank you.
And I'm terrified I'm going to pronounce your name again wrong. Is it Mio?
No question. Thank you.
Okay. And Dominique?
No questions.
And Dinah?
I just asked my question.
Oh, okay, sorry. I think I thought that was the counselor speaking. My apologies. Elena?
I have a question about the lull that you mentioned in operations. Is that expected to last for November, or is that just the winter status of operations?
It's kind of, I guess it's just like a transition period right now. Like kind of everybody across HRM is in that. Maybe a lull is not a good word. It's kind of acclimatizing to a change in operational focus. So like in the next week, all of like HRM, both like public works staff is moving into winter works. We're not a part of winter works, but the focus just changes. So certain work is like stopping that can't be done in the winter time, or like, you know, stuff like certain like landscaping is not possible moving into the winter months. Equipment gets put into storage while other equipment gets taken out. So it's kind of, yeah, maybe the lull is not a good word, more a transitionary period. But within that period, because of the intricacies of the drainage of the park, a majority of our focus is solely on leaf removal, and will be for almost all of Parks and Rec staff in the coming weeks to remove the leaves from parks in HRM. So maybe not a lull, just not so much of a variance in what we're doing, maybe more a little bit maybe monotony, or yeah, but not like work is halting. It's more we're just changing gears.
Did that address
in
your
this,
concerns? Sorry.
sorry, Michelle?
I was going to ask if that addressed what you were asking.
Oh, yes, thank you. I had a question in the same vein about the staff. I was just curious, is this going to be the staff level then for the winter until students tend to get out in May-ish?
Yeah, so from November until May, we have 5 full-time staff, permanent staff, and then as of May 1st, we get 4 seasonal staff and 5 students. So we go up to 14.
Thank you. Is there any estimation or tracking of what the winter is expected to look like?
Meteorologists say it could be a pretty wild winter, heavy winter, whether that's like a lot of rain or a lot of snow. So I think the prediction is that it's going to be a pretty snowy winter, but yeah, we kind of just prepare for whatever's going to come.
You mentioned you got a new, was it a snow removal machine? Did you have any before that, or was this the first one?
Yeah, like we have a fleet of trucks and utility equipment with plow stuff. This is, I guess, this is to replace a vehicle that was decommissioned 2 years ago, and then kind of got caught in a limbo. But it's, I guess I'll say it's the largest truck we've had in a while. So it's quite capable. So it's kind of it's a, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, it's quite an upgrade for us, which is awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. And you said your focus right now is on the leaf blowing project. Is there a goal that you're seeking to reach, or is that just sort of ongoing maintenance?
Ongoing maintenance in the park is like, our park's a lot different than majority of parks in HRM, where our trails are the size of roads, and the drainage infrastructure in the park is large scale and, I guess, physical infrastructure rather than actual piping. There is some within the park, but it's quite dated and old. It's more of a, I guess it's ongoing maintenance, but ongoing battle. So if we don't keep the roads clear of leaves, when it rains, that leads to a drainage issue because either that water settles on the road and then affects the integrity of the road, or those leaves flow off the road into the existing drainage and then clog existing culverts and catch basins. But because there's so many trees there, staff can spend half the day blowing the roads of leaves, and then their accompanying ditches, culverts, and catch basins. And then the next day, that same amount of leaves is back. So if we weren't to blow them, it's also not safe because then the roads would just become wet, mucky, slippery leaves for the next month. And if we don't maintain that and keep that off, then when the cold weather comes, those freeze and then freeze to the road. So then it's kind of it's arduous, but it's part of regular maintenance.
Thank you, Ian. No further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask a question, and that was that I wanted to clarify all the stuff that you're just reviewing there as a regular park, or we're not. That's all things that we usually see from your staff through this time of year, and none of that's new stuff, right? Like, I'm not expecting to see anything different than I've seen. It's all business as usual.
Yeah,
Okay.
business as usual. You might see some new equipment and such, but no, business as usual.
Okay. You mentioned the forestry thinning. Is that happening? Well, it's over now, but was that happening throughout the park?
Yeah, so it's part of the master plan and the operational plan as a response to, I guess, everything that happened during Hurricane Juan. And
can I just ask about a specific area? Because that was something that I didn't know that was going on, and I did have some concerns about Heather Road. That actual natural patch of heather that's there seems to be really growing up and having alders grow up through it. Is that going to be addressed, or is that going to be better cared for? Does that come up with the thinning project or through another way?
That would be more internal. We made efforts to probably about 6 or 7 years ago to do some maintenance on the heather patch, which the heather patch kind of just was left to its own devices for a while, and
it looked beautiful for so long when it was left to its own devices, and now we have a plan, and it seems to be getting taken over.
Maintenance was done in there to remove some of those trees, and then within the following years, our staff arborist we were all kind of surprised that by removing vegetation from within the heather patch and doing maintenance work in there seemed to have adverse effects on the heather patch itself.
Oh, really?
And it hasn't quite recovered since then, which is upsetting, but it's kind of just been left since then to do its thing, because it was left for so long to just do its thing, but then it was getting, I guess, undermined and overmined with other vegetation.
Right.
But in the process of removing that, it took its toll on the heather patch. So we've kind of stepped back from that because it, almost like it had a mind of its own and needed to be left to itself. But that's
so the experts are
suggesting is still monitored. Pardon?
So the experts are basically suggesting less is more, like where it'll do a better job looking after itself if we're not interfering with it.
And go in there when necessary. But the arborist is monitoring it, and
good.
Since then, and it was just kind of a shock operationally, because the intent was to do it good, but it
it didn't. Because it's such a beautiful. That one is one of my favorite parts of the park. So
and that wasn't on the thinning. Areas around there were, but that little section
that's something different. Okay. And again, because I wasn't able to rely on the camera earlier when I was following the chair's information, so I'm not sure who asked about it, but I've seen people wondering. So that is a playground that's going in at the lower parking lot.
Yes.
Okay. And is it, what kind of playground is it? Is it anything specific about it that that would be of concern, or of just, is it your typical, is it like a water pad or anything like that? Is it?
No, no water
Yes.
pad. I don't know the style of play structure. I
Okay.
know that the workout equipment is staying or being replaced with a new one, so that will
Oh,
be
okay.
still there. Um,
And
it'll
is that, sorry to interrupt, but is that where because because I usually walk with my dogs, I don't go there because I don't go there because I'm not allowed. So I've seen pictures of, like, someone showed a picture of where that there was work being done, but I haven't passed by it myself because I'm always after 10 a.m. and so I don't take that
right.
path. So is that where it is, near where the workout equipment is?
Yes, yes, that
Oh,
was
okay.
deemed like the only. The only part I really played in that was I was asked if that was a appropriate space, and
Sure.
really, there's really nowhere else in the park that it would be appropriate.
Yeah.
Without, it's already an open space, and then it doesn't really intersect with any cultural monuments or booking sites and so forth. There used to be a washroom there years ago that was removed,
Hmm.
but as to what the structure looks like, I'm not briefed on that, but
Sure. No, that's fine.
I imagine it'll be similar to any of the newer structures that you would see around town.
Sure.
But they vary depending on the vendor that chooses to
Right.
take that on. But
And is it safe to assume, because sometimes it's not, but it's safe to assume that it would be something that's in keeping with that area? Like, it's not going to be, like it's, I don't know.
yeah,
Like you
it's not
said,
going to be
the
like
playground,
an alien themed
playground.
playground or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's something that's going to match the aesthetic, or there's going to, it's going to fit in
Yeah,
somewhere.
I imagine it will be, rather than choosing a theme, which some of them are, or if there, it'll probably be pretty streamlined too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually walked by it this morning, and it's two little sections. One is swings and one is slides, and it seems to be geared towards quite young children, the size of the slides and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the focus, because there are a lot of, the grammar school does bring a lot of children there, and a lot of daycares bring children there during the day. So it was more to focus on, like under 7 and under, rather than like a 9 to 12, a 7 to 12 age group.
So what was the process for, where did the idea for a playground there come from? Because that wasn't part of, like, I've started to look at the comprehensive plan, and they talk about putting a permanent structure there, a building, an information center. There's talks of, putting back a little cafe restaurant, but I didn't see any mention of proposing a playground. How did
That came through, I guess, from the public, like public interest, public request. Previous meetings, it was brought up in the past. People within the district had reached out to Way Mason, previous counselor, to push for that. I guess it was never in the plan, but a need from or a desire from the public was recognized, and then that went ahead.
Michelle, you're muted if you're talking.
My apologies. I didn't realize that my mute button had come on. I was just going through, as since we were doing it by speakers list, that left, I believe, Councillor White to ask any questions.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious to know where the playground was too, so thanks for telling me that. and definitely have noticed the need for one over the years. So I think it's great. Couple questions about the leaves. Are those all removed from the park, or can any of them be moved around because it's a forested area?
Yeah, like they're removed. They're basically blown from the road into the woods.
Okay.
And then, but with the way that the drainage works in the park, where the ditches run parallel to the roads, it's a process where we have a machine with a blower in the front that basically does a route through the park, and then individuals then have to come behind them to then blow the sides of the roads. So the leaves are all just blown into the woods. Basically.
Oh, that's good. That's great.
Yeah.
My other questions were about the new vehicles you have. It sounds like a truck and maybe an ATV. Is that the other one? I didn't understand the description.
The other one is, we just got it today. If you've seen the vehicles that plow the sidewalks, they're like yellow articulated utility vehicles. It's one of those.
Okay. All right. And I was just wondering.
And then it.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's upfitted with like an industrial snowblower on the front. We do have equipment with snowblowers, but the one on this is larger and yeah, has a lot more power and capability.
Yeah,
and that machine also will be able to salt and spread sand as well. It has that kind of capabilities.
Are the new vehicles electric? We've been talking about Halifax, and we're supposed to be net zero by 2030.
No, so the replacement truck is a F450, and I don't think they. Yeah, that is a gas vehicle, and then the utility vehicle is diesel.
Okay, I'll just follow up with them to find out what's the plan there. We're getting close. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I think everyone's had a chance to ask questions. Was there anything else? Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is an update on homelessness in the park. So I'll ask Max Chauvin, Director of Housing and Homelessness, to speak on the item.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I do have a sort of an update presentation on homelessness overall, and then we can certainly answer some questions and talk about the situation around the park. So let me just pull this forward. Let's see. So my name is Max Chauvin. I'm the Director of Housing and Homelessness for the municipality. And I just put a little bit of an information presentation here together for you. So we'll just walk through that. Happy to then answer questions and so on. So one of the first things I thought we would just mention is that, well, when we look around the park, we look around the city, we look around even in the county, we see lots of evidence of homelessness. People in encampments and some of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit. But it is important to remember that homelessness is a symptom of other problems that we're facing in the community. The lack of available housing stock. So are there places that people can live that provide, that they can afford, and that they have the necessary supports to be able to stay housed? Poverty. Access to health care is a huge issue for people. Access particularly to mental health care, addiction services, all very, very important. Food insecurity, and a whole variety of other issues, some that I've listed here. We have to address homelessness as we see it in our community. We have to help solve those issues. We have to find people options for housing, but we should remember that really it is a symptom of other things, and strategically long-term, we need to look at these things if we're going to see the end of homelessness, the end of encampments and people in those kind of circumstances. People often talk about what happened, because this wasn't a big issue 5 or 6 years ago. And we do various counts of the people who are experiencing homelessness. people who are sleeping rough, which means they're sleeping outside. And in 2018, that count identified 18 people in HRM sleeping outside. And in the fall of 2023, there were over 200, and it very much worked as an exponential curve, with the problem becoming much worse over the recent couple of years. And we should differentiate between those that are sleeping rough, which is those numbers on the right side of your screen, and the by name list. The by name list is a voluntary list to join where people identify that they are in need of housing. And so that number is over 1,300. It includes people who are sleeping rough, but it also includes people in other situations, including couch surfing, sleeping in your vehicle, that people don't have a home. And fairly consistently over the last year, that number has grown at 4%, which means we're seeing about 10 to 12 people a week becoming homeless. And so that will become important as we talk in a couple of moments about some of the things that we need to look at. But that we do see this very large growth in homelessness. People often do ask, who are the people who are sleeping rough? And so these are from some of those surveys where we do the counts. These are some breakdowns of some interesting statistics when we look at those that are sleeping outside. 1 in 4 are former children or youth in care of the province, so they're foster children. 1 in 5 have an after-birth brain injury. 1 in 3 identify as someone with a disability or with a learning and cognitive challenge. 1 in 3 are Indigenous or Black, which is a large overrepresentation of those populations. And 6 out of 10 identify with having a mental health challenge, and 6 out of 10 identify as someone struggling with substance abuse disorder. So as we talk about the supports that we need, as how do we help people, it is important to identify some of these things. And probably the best way for us to address homelessness is to stop people from becoming homeless in the first place. And so if we look at a couple of these numbers, how do we support children and youth coming out of the child protection system? And they are putting some new systems in place to help people who have that experience not necessarily struggle as much as they have in the past. And the same for those with after-birth brain injuries. 1 in 5 is more than the number of people with an after-birth brain injury in the general population. So how do we support somebody through health care that may have had that brain injury to help them not end up in a situation where they're struggling with homelessness? So just to give you a bit of a picture of who some of the folks are. We also do talk regularly with people who are experiencing homelessness. These are stock photographs. They're not people from HRM. But the people who know what homelessness is like the best are the people who are living it. And so people tell us their wants are really simple: food, water, protection from the elements, a bathroom, a safe place to sleep, and a place for valuables. So not particularly surprising. One of the interesting things that we need to keep in mind as well is in 1943, Maslow published his hierarchy of needs, that triangle. And at the very base is shelter, food, housing, those kind of pieces. And without them, people aren't able to tackle any of the other issues they're facing. So we really need to find ways to deliver these very basic things to people who are experiencing homelessness so that they can move forward in their life. We know that people who are experiencing homelessness are highly stigmatized. We hear stories from people who tell us they get spit on every day, that they get called names. We know that people have gone into an encampment and set fire to people's belongings. We recently had a situation where somebody who was working on other things to get out of homelessness came back to their tent and somebody had cut it up with a knife and smeared everything they owned with dog feces. So there is a lot of stigma that makes things very difficult for people to advance their life once they're in the midst of experiencing homelessness. We talk a lot about who's responsible for what. Well, this is a municipal responsibility. This is a provincial responsibility. This is a federal responsibility. People experiencing homelessness don't care. They just want help. And they would tell us that violence is a regular part of everyday life. People steal from them. They have been threatened. There has been acts of violence against them, both from other people experiencing homelessness and people who are going by, who are just regular members of the community and choose to treat somebody experiencing homelessness in that way. People do ask a lot about what is the solution. What do we need to do to solve homelessness? And at the end of the day, we need to create deeply affordable housing. And this is probably important as you listen to discussions about homelessness. Affordable housing is defined by CMHC as 20 to 30% below market value. But if you look at some of the apartments you'll see certainly in Peninsula Halifax at $2,200 or $2,400 rent, 20% off of that is defined as affordable housing, but it's not affordable to many people. Deeply affordable housing is rent that is geared to somebody's income, and they pay 30% of what their income is for housing. The challenge, of course, is that is not quite often sufficient rent to be able to cover the market costs of a building and operating it. And so there is a role for government to play here in supporting how do we create deeply affordable housing opportunities for people. So housing they can afford. People need permanent housing. Anything that's not permanent is highly stressful. Am I going to be able to stay here? Is it going to get pulled away from me? So we want permanent housing options. People's housing has to feel safe, supportive, sustainable, and accessible. And we don't define those for people. I can't tell you that your housing is safe. You've got to feel that. So we need to listen to the expertise, the lived expertise of those that are out there struggling with housing, to understand what does safe mean? What does supportive mean? Sometimes people, we can get you into some form of temporary or permanent housing, but you need ongoing support. If we just transfer you into that housing without ongoing support, you probably will struggle. Those with substance abuse challenges, again, an issue. Sustainable and accessible. We know that 1 in 3 of the people experiencing homelessness struggle with barriers that they face when accessing pieces. 1 in 5 afterbirth brain injury. Accessibility is really important. And one of the things that we need to do is a commitment to continually building new, deeply affordable housing to meet needs. And if we look at some really successful countries that have done really, really well with addressing homelessness, you've probably all heard of Finland. It's one of the the really examples that's held up very highly. They build new public, deeply affordable housing every single year. And in their case, what their goal is if you become homeless, you are housed within 24 hours. If that housing doesn't happen to work where they got you, they find you something else that has a different set of supports and different sets of circumstances till they find something that can meet your need. So when we talk about all of the issues we face, at the end of the day, if we are not creating deeply affordable housing for people, housing they can afford, we are going to struggle. And so that has to be very, very clear in the work that we do. Housing is a provincial responsibility. So is the provision of social services. But the people that we see in parks, on the street, are in our municipality. And so While it's a provincial responsibility, HRM does do things to try and support people. 5 sort of big categories of work we do. One is humanitarian aid. It's the outreach workers who reach out to people and go out and see and ask them, what are your circumstances? Do you need housing? Can we get you on the by name list so that you'd be eligible to access some form of temporary, supportive, or permanent housing? You need to be on that list. Help people with food and where in your area might there be food access? Can we help you with that? And a whole variety of things that we sort of classify as that humanitarian aid piece. The goal always being, how do we get you referred to some kind of sheltering and housing option? Because as we'll talk about in a moment, there is nothing good about encampments. The second thing is we work with the province and service providers about how do we prevent people from becoming homeless. If we can do that, then we slow the flow in. As I mentioned, most of this year, the by name list grew at 4% a month. And so that's 40-some people a month becoming homeless. So if we could cut that by 50%, if we can cut it by 75%, then we are way ahead of the game. We do some work around public education. Our planning and development folks look at how do we create and preserve affordable and deeply affordable housing. One of the challenges that we face right now is we are actually in the middle of the crisis losing affordable housing. So many of you have probably driven in some various parts of the city, some around the Halifax Common, and there used to be some large sort of rooming house or multi-unit apartment spaces that were relatively inexpensive, and we've got those kind of structures throughout the municipality. Many of them are being sold, renovated, and then being re-rented instead of perhaps at $600 or $700 a month, now at $1,500 a month, $1,800 a month. And so we are struggling with, in the middle of the crisis, the loss of housing options. And we also, as a municipality, spend a lot of time supporting the province as they create sheltering options and housing projects. So, for example, the municipality provided the multipurpose room of the Halifax Forum for a 100-person shelter. In other sites, we help with snow clearing or garbage or repairs or a variety of things like that. But that is sort of some of the work that the municipality is doing. We want to talk a little bit about encampments. So one of the pieces that comes with this work, and there is examples in case law in British Columbia, in Ontario, there is research by a whole variety of housing advocates and government. And if you're interested in any of that, I will give you my email address at the end of the presentation. You're welcome to reach out. I can provide you with lots of information there. But essentially, people have the right to go somewhere. And case law so far has noted, if there is no place for you to go, then you can shelter outside on municipal property. And that is where we end up with, if we don't have housing and supportive housing that has those services that people need, then people are going to be living outside in our parks, in our event spaces, until we're able to address that. And that said, even though that's the only option people have, it is still it's not a solution, and it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the people who are forced to live in them, and it's bad for the community around them. For the people who are forced to live in encampments, they don't have any stability. They have no security. They suffer from severe levels of stress. They aren't able to access mental and physical health care. And so there are people who are in desperate need of mental health care, of addiction services. I can take you out in the community right now and would introduce you to people who would go on their knees and beg you to find them rehab because they don't want to live the way they're living, but they need help. There's violence in encampments. There's unsanitary conditions. In a designated location that the municipality has 5 of right now. They provide porta potties and so on. But even all of those are full, sometimes 3 times more than sort of ideally we would want them to be. And so we have people who are in non-designated sites. And again, we really don't have an option to move them because there's nowhere for them to go. But they end up using the washroom outside. There's garbage and waste and so on that all becomes challenging. And we go back to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this thing, I need housing, I need food, I need to be warm, I need water, all of those so basic needs. If we don't address those pieces, people cannot move forward. They can't live, they can't make changes in their life. And you've probably heard the discussion about an approach that we're using called housing first. The goal is the first thing we do is house you. Then we can work on wraparound support so that you can stay housed and that then you can stabilize and then have time to think about where do I want to go? What do I want to do next? And the ability to move forward. We also should note that there are people living in encampments who don't have housing and so on, but there's also people who are going to work. Their only challenge is they can't make enough money to pay rent. And there are also students living in tents who are going to university or going to college, and again, can't find a place to live. So encampments are very bad for the people that have to live in them, and why we need to find housing options, and that has to be so important. It's also bad for the community around them. If somebody's living in a park or in an event space, that space isn't available for other uses that the park was intended for. There is lots of garbage and waste from living outside. And so we have staff that go out every day and do garbage work and waste work wherever we have people in encampments. But still, that is troublesome for people in community, and we've seen things blow into people's yards and so on. Community cohesion is damaged by encampments. People get frustrated with the fact that there's an encampment and people are forced to live outside in their community. I have a person I talk to fairly regularly who lives near an encampment and tells you that their grandkids won't come visit them anymore because they don't feel safe. And so we end up with this increased level of tension, and the community becomes less cohesive. Most common phone call I get right now from people is, nobody should have to live that way, and neither should I have to live with the impact on my community around me. And so encampments are not good. We have reports of increased crime. We have reports of the economic impact to businesses and stores that are around encampments. And we also have to recognize that if we didn't have encampments, there are things that the resources we invest in working with folks and in those spaces, different things could be done. So we need to recognize that, well, we have encampments and we're going to have them for a while. Because until we're able to create the long-term permanent supportive housing, but we need to strive every day to find alternatives to an encampment. And there are some different things that we're talking about as we go forward, looking ahead. One of the options that would impact parks and so on is to have a day center where people can go, they can get access to food, water, laundry, meet with service providers, and a whole host of things. For some people, that would just solve so many issues for them and reduce the negative impacts on themselves and on others. We have large communal shelters like the Halifax Forum. We have temporary housing options, pallet shelters or shelter villages, the Bridge, the Waverly Inn, tiny homes, and that we are continuing to work on permanent housing options, the Overlook, the apartments, other things that are coming. And it would be really, really important for us to make sure we understand that sometimes people will say there's nothing being done. And in the past couple of years, the province has opened, between all of these and other resources, more than 1,000 beds for people who are experiencing homelessness. Probably our provincial counterparts, if we compared them across the country to other cities per capita, we would find that they're leading the way in doing this work. The challenge is the problem is growing so quickly and so fast. But I would be very quick to correct anybody who comes around and tells us that nobody's doing anything or not helping. What's really important in all of these options as we try and help people is that they're structured. It's not just about having enough of them, it's also about having them structured to help people. So if people need mental health care, wherever they have to move to, wherever they want to go, there's got to be those supports, or it's not going to be successful. People do ask a little bit about the future and what's coming. CMHC in their report this year told us that they do not see an end to the increase in rental pressures in HRM. So we are going to continue to see this rise in rent costs. As a good example, last year we had 22,000 people move to HRM. We built just under 5,000 homes. And so we are not meeting, we're growing faster than we can build. And so that's going to be a challenge going into the future. We know that there are many, many people who are in what we call core housing need. They're spending more than the 30% they should spend on housing. I think most people know that at the beginning of the year, the rent cap was extended at 5%, so rent can't be increased more than 5% per year. What's interesting is 5% is enough that some people can no longer afford their rent and they're being driven into homelessness, and 5% is not enough for landlords to be able to keep up on the cost increases they're facing. And we do see some landlords actually selling their properties off because they simply can't afford to keep in business with that kind of rent restriction. Our population is growing faster than housing stock. We're losing housing stock. We have students and refugees that without housing, and we really do not have enough plans to address the need for that deeply affordable housing that is essential if we're actually going to solve the problem. I did also want to, we've talked about a little bit about some of the work that's going on. I also wanted to make sure people know that there are good things going on and there is good work being done. Shubie Campground is hosting a number of up to 17 people who live in their RVs full time. And so they, in the summer and the spring and the fall, they usually park them at an RV park that is sort of on the outskirts of the city. And but in the winter they all close, so that we do open the Shubie Park campground and provide people with power and garbage and sewer service and so on, and try and provide some people who are living full-time in an RV. There are 85 new pallet shelters, which are opening in 2 shelter villages, and those will provide people with an opportunity to move inside. They get a bed, table, chair, some storage, heat and cooling. And in the village that we create with pallet shelters, there's also bathrooms, laundry, some food service and things like that. So that will create 85 new spaces. There are also already in place 2 pallet villages, one of them in Sackville, which is full, and one in Dartmouth that is currently welcoming people. The one in Dartmouth that's currently open now is focused on seniors. So each of those pallet villages usually adopts what I generally call a theme. Who are they going to focus on? So again, what we need to do is get people out of encampments, out of parks. So this will be 85 brand new spaces that haven't existed before that hopefully will allow us to do that. Tiny homes. If you've been out to Sackville, the tiny home community there is going up. It's 60 tiny homes. And in them, people have a washroom, a shower, kitchenette, sleeping area, as well as there's some communal space in the tiny home community. And that will provide up to 70 people with a tiny home. There's also other supportive housing units that are coming online. So there's lots of good news and things coming. What is really important is that the structures that come online must be built with the wraparound services to meet the needs of those that are sleeping rough. And if it doesn't, then there are certainly lots of people, 1,300 people on the by name list, certainly lots of people that need help and will be able to take advantage of it. But if we want to see the reduction in those in encampments, we are going to have to look at making sure that those supports are around them. So as we come up to winter, people ask, what are some options? We're working with our colleagues at the province on a winter shelter. We always look at options. Can we provide power to somebody in an encampment so that they aren't using a propane or a butane heating source that poses lots of fire risk and carbon monoxide risk? And as we do outreach and provide people some supports, can we provide them some better gear to stay warm and to work through the winter? But if you look at the things that are at the top of the page, we're hoping that those pallet shelters and those shelter villages will be available in December. The tiny homes are already welcoming people. So really, there's a huge effort on right now to how can we take those that are living in encampments and find opportunities for them. I'll leave you with some big questions. So how do we address the gaps in the system? Housing we've talked about, but also there are challenges for people who are couples, youth, seniors. We do have a number of sort of large-scale open concept shelters, but how do we create single occupancy options where people have a place that they can lock so that their stuff is secure? Currently, people who go to a communal living type shelter worry that their belongings are going to get stolen, that other things are going to happen. And how do we support people who perhaps are struggling with significant substance abuse disorder? And how do we help them address that and do so in a safe way and hopefully be able to pursue different things in their life going forward? We continue to have people fall into homelessness. And how do we prevent the growth of encampments? If we don't have permanent housing and options to move people into, and people continue to keep falling into the system, we're going to have more people who need more encampment space. And I think, as we've said, encampments are bad in every way. How do we prevent that path? How do we convince provincial and federal funders to further invest in deeply affordable supportive housing options? Not that we're not investing in some, we just need to invest in more if we're going to beat that. How do we address some of the significant issues that we face in encampments and in other spaces, but also address the serious criminal activities around drugs and human trafficking? One question that gets asked a lot is there a point that we do so much for somebody that we actually damage their level of resilience and ability to move forward on their own? And one of the other things that, as this crisis grows so quickly, how do we support the sector that is going to provide services and supports so that we can continue to meet the need? So that is sort of a really brief overview of the housing and homeless situation. I've put my name and email address, and your staff supports for the committee can also share this with you, and I believe it's in one of your attachments to the meeting. You're always welcome to reach out with questions and suggestions. But I wanted to sort of share some of that. The key things that we're looking at, and there we go, I'm trying to stop sharing, but my system is not letting me stop sharing. Oh, there it goes. Somebody saved me who knows more about the technology than I do. So there's sort of a picture of the problem, things that are going on, and how we need to move forward to address people that are at this point stuck, living in parks and those kind of locations while they wait to be able to access a housing option. But I'm happy to answer questions and things like that if people have them.
Thank you, Max. I think we'll turn it over to the committee for questions by using the speakers list. So we'll start first with Ryan.
No questions, thank you.
Okay. And I apologize again. Miyu,
No question. I haven't come up with any questions. So
can you remind me again on the pronunciation of your name because I need to practice.
okay.
What is it?
It's Muyu Xia.
Muyu. Okay. Thank you very much. Dominique,
No questions.
Dinah,
No questions, thank you.
Elena,
It's Elena.
oh, I'm
And
sorry, Ellen, I'm sorry.
that's okay. So the plan for designating Point Pleasant Park to have tents, do you know anything about the timeline for that?
Well, there was no plan to designate Point Pleasant Park. Point Pleasant Park was put on a list of 9 potential sites that could be considered if we needed more designated locations. We do know that Regional Council and the mayor want to have a discussion about that. So that will be coming forward at a future meeting for council to talk about and to look at.
Okay, so to my understanding, it's just proposal right now. There's no action being done to move forward with that.
No, there was not. What it was council had asked for a list of locations. And so there was a list of 9 that were proposed to council. And then there was direction provided to the CAO. If we need more encampments, these are spaces that can be looked at. But there is no definitive plan to put an encampment in Point Pleasant Park. And there's no timeline to put one in there. And as I said, I think Councillor White and the mayor and the other councillors are going to have a discussion about that sort of piece in the coming weeks at a council meeting.
If that were to happen, or when one visualizes what that would look like, would that be one of those 4 to 6 tent sites that was on a slide?
It could be a whole variety of things. The 4 to 6 tents is what it's about clustering. It is about 4 to 6 tents together generally are quite manageable for the folks that are in them. If it gets bigger, they end up having some conflicts with the other folks. And so that's what that is. It's to suggest that's sort of a very manageable number for the folks that have to live there. But in terms of what would an encampment look like, each one is different based on the needs and what people need to have and what they need access to and things like that. So there is no definitive, well, this is the Point Pleasant Park encampment idea. There is nothing like that at all. It is a list of 9 sites that we could look at going forward if we needed more encampment sites. At this point, there is no plan to put an encampment at Point Pleasant Park. And as I said, Councillor White and the other folks will be having this discussion in council in the coming weeks.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Max.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
I guess I really appreciate hearing from you, Max, because of course, anybody that's concerned about housing issues in our area obviously knows your name. But this isn't the first time I've actually heard you do your presentation, so I appreciate that. Just a couple of things which I feel are a little bit off topic for this meeting, but while you're here doing your presentation, I'm going to take advantage of that. Would you say that that HRM is truly a housing first, has a housing first program? I mean, don't we have restrictions on people with addictions and other things that prevents them from actually having options because all of there are no options of houses for people to go to or actual shelters. We're looking at the temporary shelters. So were there not restrictions on, say, something like the Halifax Forum last year which meant that we weren't housing first?
Well, I think when you look at housing first, I think the one of the pieces is choice, and no one solution works for everybody. And
Right.
This is one of the challenges that I think we face in this conversation is people are looking for the solution, and we'll never find the solution. We'll What we need is a variety of options.
I agree with
So
that.
I can take you to people who would go to any, doesn't matter
Right.
which shelter, which temporary housing project, doesn't matter. I can introduce you to people who would tell you, this is the best place I've ever been to, and it is saving my life.
Right.
I can take you to other people who have perhaps tried to go there or want to go there, who would tell you, this is the worst place that's ever been created on planet Earth.
Sure. Yep.
And so we don't want everybody to look the same, because everybody's needs are different. So
Right.
we like to talk about solution. We like to talk about wraparound services. And I think what we don't talk about enough is it needs to look different for people.
Right.
There is no
100%.
right answer. So
Yep.
I think we,
But of the options that the city has put forward, like the different things you've named off, and including which, we're opening up the forum again this winter. Are any of those truly housing first? Is there someone who is suffering from active addiction who will not be turned away at the door? But
well, they will not be turned away if there's space.
So
There are
okay.
a variety of options, but it
But there are
doesn't mean
some places that I mean, because some people are coming and they are intoxicated now, that they might not be. I see the issues with fighting and drinking and all of those things, but
Yeah.
there when when you have a significant alcohol addiction, there's a whole lot more broken down sickness in health and physical health and mental health happening while there's alcohol on your breath than there are
Absolutely.
pub brawls. So
But the province has,
some of those places don't. If they smell alcohol on you, you can't get in. And those
Correct.
are, I know those are not offered by nonprofit groups. Are there anywhere somewhere in the city can go that they're, whatever their addiction is, that we go, okay, we understand that you're a challenge for the environment we're trying to create here, because we're trying to accommodate as many people as possible, but we still welcome them in, or we still try to put a roof over their head for that night?
well, there are options in the city that do focus on providing services to people who are struggling with the issues that you describe.
Right.
But there's not always space
Yeah.
in them. And so this is why it's so important as we look and talk about how do we get people out of parks.
Right.
It is that we need, as new resources come on, to be able to service those that are looking for help.
Right.
And so you have addiction issues, you have mental health issues, you have folks with that have issues that relate to gender.
Yeah. Yeah, and
you need special accommodations.
I've volunteered in the in those vulnerable with vulnerable groups, and I was a volunteer at Hope Cottage for almost 15 years.
Yeah.
So I have some familiarity with what you're explaining, and I understand and appreciate the nuances and the restrictions that you need to have in order to safely accommodate as many people as possible. But I'm just wondering, I'm gonna pressure you on this just the tiniest bit, because I finally get to to talk with you after hearing about your presentation so long. Is there any place in the city where you feel that we can actually meet that definition, and then it's not provided by another nonprofit agency, but the city is providing a space that would be truly considered housing first, that it really is
The
about.
city does not provide any sheltering or housing spaces. They're a provincial responsibility.
Right. But
So
I guess
none of them are offered by the city.
Right. So the ones that that the city is a key player in, like do we pay 1/3? Is it that we pay for the forum each
No.
winter? What's the
We do
amount?
not.
Is it
We don't pay
well,
we don't pay
we pay
anything. We provide the space at no
right,
charge.
the in-kind, but does that work out to be about 1/3 of what the costs to operate?
Not even
Okay.
close. Not even 10%.
Okay.
Not even 5%.
Right. Okay. So I guess I think you're trying to reassure me, but I'm feeling like I'm feeling less comfortable now. That
Well, there are people
because
currently where there is no place to go.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
as the province continues to bring on more resources, what we need to focus on is ensuring that as new resources come online, they meet the needs of those who are still sleeping rough.
right.
And
So
so it's
that,
about it's about a constant conversation
right,
that this is okay, we're bringing on this. So we
right,
then need to go back and look at who are the people who need to access that
right.
and what are their needs, and are there people, wow, we aren't able to help this group of people, then we need to keep talking about, well, let's find that. So it's an evolving piece. It's not a static
Right. So when you
moment.
were talking about, because I think one of the biggest problems is that people have either forgotten about or were never taught about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that's one of the biggest problems in our city today, because they forget that, you know, some of those basic things, it shouldn't be against the law to be poor and sick. And it feels like sometimes that's the way certain members of our society paint other members of society.
Yeah.
So it's very frustrating. And I try to recognize the privilege that I have as I sit in my house right now, but I do work and volunteer a lot with vulnerable populations, and I can actually say that, you know, I know a few homeless people, and or
Yeah.
you know, in the situation with Hope Cottage, most of those people are not homeless, but they do not have a penny left to eat with the
Correct.
food after they paid for what they managed to get, what, you know, whatever shelter they do manage to have. So some people don't realize how nuanced that is. And I saw a Lexus parked next to Shakespeare by the Sea about a month ago, that the inside of it was rigged with like blankets and things,
Yeah.
and it obviously someone was sleeping there for the night, and it was a Lexus. So people don't realize that, you know, it's not, I guess come across that argument so often, that it's the demographic is young, and it's male, and it's drinkers, and it's addicts, and they choose that, and they just want that, and it's I'm sorry, whoever's in that Lexus sleeping in their car next to Shakespeare by the Sea is not that demographic that people have in their mind, but it's a reality. So
So
yeah,
when we do what we call lived expertise consultation,
right,
98% or something like that of people say, I want four walls and I want to be inside.
yeah,
There are some folks who want to live outside.
right,
Very, very few, but there are some. There are some who live outside because of their mental health. They
yes.
cannot manage something else.
And I was going to say, do you think that it's truly wanting to live outside versus they cannot live inside with the options that are available to
Without
them, where
more
they would have
support,
to conform to certain, you know, rules or programs or what have you, that they just either, you know, physically or mentally cannot.
I think there's a bit of both. I think there
Right,
is some of that. I think there's also people who cannot live inside without additional wraparound support to help them.
right.
And
Um,
so it's a conversation about, I think, and again, I'll just use mental health care because it's the one we talk about.
yep.
For some people, we need to have an on-site prescribing clinician
Mm-hmm.
who can help people are there all the
100%.
time, able to help them.
Right,
And so there are some times when people say things like they want to live outside, they're unhousable. None of those are true.
right,
I mean, there's obviously a couple of exceptions, but in general, the answer is we have not structured things yet to be able to support them to live
right,
inside. And so that is an ongoing piece of a dialogue that we need to have, which is about, okay, here's, and the outreach workers and all of those groups, they meet every week
yes.
and they sit down
No,
and they
feel that,
look and they
yeah,
go, and the province has leadership staff that are there to listen and to go, wow, okay, we need more of this, we need more of that. And it's an ongoing piece as new people come into homelessness. What are the results that are needed? We know some of the things that are needed. Mental health care. We know that addiction services are needed by some folks. we know that people need a variety of other things that are out there, and I'm being told I'm being long, so I will be careful
Okay,
and
we'll wrap it
slow
up quickly
myself
then.
down. Michelle, in the short answer though, if you ever want to go out for coffee and sit down and talk about it, I'm
Yeah.
game. Just send me an email.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just, yeah, I guess, that like I said, I've heard you, I've heard you quoted, I've heard, coverage from things that, that you've spoken to, or you've made presentations to council when they've asked questions, and and it's like they've woken up for the first time when you've had to explain, wait a second, this is actually how it works, or this is what's going on. So, and again, I recognize that the city's hands are tied to some extent because you're not responsible for homelessness. But one of the things that I have concerns about is I'm hearing that, there's a lot of talk about let's get pallet homes for that, and not the brand name, but from local builders and local suppliers, and make that, at least buy them locally, and they put a big price tag, or they like to quote the big price tag that goes with the cost of an individual pallet home. But it's my understanding that part of that company, that organization that sells them, is that you can't buy from them unless you are guaranteeing that you're putting those support services in place. And so I'm wondering, like, are you planning to lobby, or is there discussions and preparations in place so that if the government decides that, okay, we're going to give it to what's one of the ones, is it Scotian Homes that you see on the way to near Stewiacke or something, where they have those modular type of homes, and could be ramp up to build pallet type of shelters pretty quickly. But that's great, but that would have the money stay in the province, and it would help somebody grow their business. But if their mentality is that I'm just building this shelter and sending it out the door, and there's no one that is going, yeah, but you don't get unless there's those wraparound supports for the people living in them. Like, do you have a plan for?
So again, housing is done by the province.
Yes,
So
yeah.
they did the purchasing. And so if you have questions about how they did that purchasing, they've really got to go to them, because I can't tell you.
Oh,
I don't
no,
know.
I understand that. I'm saying though is that, I'm hearing talk that they're looking at other providers, and other providers don't necessarily have the qualifications or the requirements to for their buyers to provide wraparound services. So if, I'm wondering if the city has been keeping that in mind, or is planning to doing any lobbying with the province, because it'll sound like a great initiative that we're going to buy all of these homes from some local person, but it's going to fall on make more problems for the city if those pallet homes, the no-name pallet homes, don't come with support services.
Well, to be clear, neither do pallet. Pallet
Okay.
has a set of dignity standards that you have to
Yes,
meet,
right.
but the wraparounds are provided by the province.
Yes, they're provided by, but but like you said, they do have some sort of, I guess from what I've read, and I'm certainly open to being corrected because it was a while ago, but they do have, like you said, they're a type of ethical
Yes.
organization that says, okay, but you need to meet these needs, or these minimum standards have to be in support. We're not just in the business of selling you couple dozen and we don't care how you use them.
That's correct.
We're looking
But
to
all
meet
of those
there.
services that get met are all done by the
Oh, yeah.
province when they set it up. And then we
Right.
support them through snow clearing and a variety of other things.
Yeah. My
Um,
concern is that if they don't have that requirement from the purchaser, then from the provider, that it has the potential to fall by the wayside. So
that's important that you express that to the province, because
yes.
but I have not heard of any
Yeah.
plans that of what you're describing at all. So I have no knowledge of anything like that. We do work almost daily with our colleagues at the province, and that's never been mentioned. The focus right now is on getting the shelter, 85 shelter villages, the tiny homes open, and so on. So I
Yeah,
haven't heard anything like that at all.
I'm just concerned about it, but it was only casual whispers. It wasn't from a large number of people, but people who seem to be not necessarily as supportive of finding help for unhoused people will then look at the price tag of a Palin home and go, "Phew, couldn't we get more for our buck from that?" And that's when I've heard like, why couldn't we source those locally?
And again, I think a conversation that has to be had with
Yes. Oh, yeah.
representatives from the province, because
Yeah.
it's not something that we're part of.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if there was any, if you were hearing any of it, and if you were preparing for that. Okay. I don't want to, I've taken up more than my fair share of time on this, but I do appreciate being able to hear from you in person for the first time. So thanks so much. And we'll move on to Councillor White, who probably should have more time than I had. Sorry about that, Councillor.
All good. I'm good. Max was with us today, and it's been really great to meet him and hear some of these things twice to settle them in my mind. So I'm good. No question. Thank you, Max.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll move on to the next item of the agenda then. Fire and emergency response at Point Pleasant. I'll ask Peter Andrews, Deputy Chief Director Operations, to speak on the item.
Good evening, Councillor White, members of the Point Pleasant Park Advisory Committee. It's truly my pleasure to be here tonight. I also have my colleague, Kara McCurdy, who is our Wildland Mitigation Program Manager. I'm going to try to queue up a slide deck, so please bear with me. I'll see if I can get this to work. If not, I've taken the good measure to ask Olamumi to have the slide deck as well. So I'm just going to see if I can get to it here. Okay. So forgive me because I am not able to see what I am projecting now, but perhaps one of you could just help me and let me know if you are seeing my slide deck.
Yeah.
Yes, we're seeing it.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I have about 13 slides here. Just take us through a little bit of the history of Point Pleasant Park from a forestry perspective. As I mentioned, I do have Kara McCurdy with me, who is a wildland mitigation program specialist and a former member of Department of Natural Resources. So she's truly the expert. So I'm going to go through a couple things, a little bit of background, current response data for our nearest apparatus responding to the park, the hydrants that are near and in the park, and sort of a general overview of firefighting operations if we were called to that location. I'll take you back a little bit about almost 25 years ago, and where there was a whole lot of dead and dying trees due in part to this longhorn beetle. And as you would recall, there was a whole strategy that to remove the trees to prevent it from spreading to others, but also that forestry cut wood could not be removed from the park because there was fear of spreading that. So we sort of weathered that, but at that time it had a pretty significant impact of about 10,000 trees that were dead and dying after that. And to add insult to injury, a few years later, in about 2003, Hurricane Juan hit, quite significantly impacting Point Pleasant Park. I think there was estimated of about 75,000 trees down, and in the aftermath of that, about 100,000 trees were planted to replace that, and we're sort of seeing the benefits of that about 20 years later. Here's a kind of a current state view of the park. An aerial view, and you get a sense of the trails and the access and the shoreline. And this one here is particularly impactful. I like this picture not just because we're in fall, but it gives you a real good sense of the distribution of the forest in the park. So you have a mix of coniferous, or those evergreen trees, fir, spruce, which are generally softwoods. You have the the coniferous trees, you have the coniferous trees, the deciduous trees, and you get a good sense of the dead trees here that still remain in the park. So a quick count of those counted about 100 or more than 100 dead trees just in this picture alone. Here's some response data. So just a quick look back over the last 3 years and year to date here for 2024. So averaging about 16 calls, 10 to 16 calls to the park. We're currently 11 to date. Some of them related to illegal burning, some of them investigations, which could be illegal burning or folks in the park after hours. outboard burning appliances. So there may have been folks attempting to have a fire in one of the fire pits along the shore. 1 water rescue, and 2 bylaw investigation, which most likely are related to fires as well. So about 11 calls this year to date. Here's a good overview of the park. I'll bring your attention to the red hydrants. Those are the municipal hydrants throughout our municipality and their proximity to the park. And there's also 3 other hydrants, which I've sort of marked with the yellow hydrants there, that are spread throughout the park and are available for firefighting to our firefighters. This picture here is particularly helpful because it gives you a sense of the difference between the ring road, as we call it, or the road that is accessible to our fire trucks to maneuver through the park, and the other lanes, which typically are not. So with that in mind, we would most likely position our fire truck nearest to wherever there might be a fire or incident, and we would move hose lines to either side of that to address any fires that we might encounter. Here's a sort of an overview of the city and the proximity of the fire stations nearest the park. So the closest one is on University Avenue. It's Fire Station 2, has 4 personnel, and it's about 2 kilometers or a 2 to 5 minute ride, depending on traffic, which is a challenge. And Station 3 coming from West Street near the Commons, which has 7 folks there that could respond, and up at Station 4. So typically our fire stations, and I've represented by the fire trucks that are in them, have a minimum of 4 personnel in them, and the West Street station has a few more. So, what causes fire? Well, lots of down fuels from hurricane damage and insect damage. And maybe I'll give Kara a chance to pick up the slide and carry on.
Hey, everybody. Well, thanks for having me. And Peter, I'll just get you to advance the slides as we go here. Going to the hurricane damage and the insect and disease damage that happens within the municipality, usually within 3 to 5 years, depending on the mortality of the tree and the condition of how it was laid in a hurricane or an event. Will depend on how dry it is and how much of a risk it is to a fire, like a wildfire risk. The good news is after a couple of years, it does become more punky rotten than it does a wildfire risk. So there's more moisture in the fuel, and there's less risk after this. Next slide, Peter.
So yeah, this is just to highlight sort of some of the experience gained in recent years, particularly in 2023. With the significant wildfires that we experienced, a few pictures from that, and showing some of our folks and their ability to deploy resources when required to address fires. I'll move on to the next slide. This one here sort of articulates the water sources that we would consider. So we already touched a little bit on the hydrants that are near and in the park, as well as if you look at top left, we have what we call forestry pumps. So this is an ability for our firefighters to source nearby water. So it could be a pond, as shown in the picture here. It might be the ocean, as we're surrounded on many sides for the park. We might also use bottom left there, a supply line. So we would run a supply line from a hydrant to where we're operating in the woods. Another opportunity or another option is to use porta tanks, where we move water using big trucks full of water and put it in a porta tank, which is sort of like a little swimming pool, which then is used to provide water or water source near where the fire is. I'll let Kara take this slide.
So back when I worked for Natural Resources, back in 2019, I was asked to come to the park to complete a wildfire, not a complete wildfire risk assessment, but to kind of identify what they can do to reduce the risk there. And when we walked around, and I can't remember the gentleman's name that I walked with, but we walked around the trail system and kind of looked at, the fuels within the park and what was dense, what was dying, what was encroaching on trail systems, and in places where people would kind of recreate, go to hang out or potentially drop a cigarette or, have a campfire or anything like that. So they were going to do a lot of cleanup, and they did in 2019 that fall. along the trails and woodlands. And what we wanted them to promote was more the hardwood species, so the trees with leaves. Several reasons. They're less susceptible to fire, less susceptible to insect that we have coming through the park at this point, and they're more wind firm. As everybody knows, Halifax is pretty windy on a good day. But the biggest thing is to reduce the amount of laddering fuels. So that's any fuels that can carry a fire from the ground to the treetops. We also looked at the structures within the park and what kind of fire risk they could pose, or what potential there was for them to burn if there's a fire risk. So looking at the Point Pleasant Park, the chance of a fire happening there is pretty, I'm going to say, low on the scale, but where you might have issues is if there's a fire on either the harbors or McNabbs, and a fire ember travels in the smoke and lands in susceptible fuels, or in a gutter on a home and then catches the structures on fire. So we have now a new wildfire advisory committee that consists of a lot of agencies within HRM, so urban forestry, green spaces, climate change, emergency measures, and folks like that. And we are looking at kind of every space within Halifax Regional Municipality and how we can reduce wildfire risk. Next slide.
So this is intended to sort of explain a little bit what laddering is. So if you go to the far left, you look at a typical forested area. You have sort of the surface fuel, which is the scrub, the logs, the tall grass, whatnot. You have these intermediate things that we call ladder fuel. Those are fuels that if a surface fire was to spread to the ladder fuel, then it has potential for the fire to get up into the treetops. So a properly managed forest that takes the time to remove as much of the ladder fueling, or even to pre-burn the surface fuels during periods of extreme fire risk, it prevents a small fire from becoming a large fire and spreading to the crowns of the trees and causing catastrophic damage to the forested area. So that's what this is intended to just show you a little bit about what laddering is and the importance of managing the forests and the ladder fuels in particular. So with that, that is the end of our presentation. We just wanted to cover very quickly sort of where we are, some of the hazards we're facing, how would we approach a fire in the park, and we look forward to your questions.
You're muted, Michelle.
Thank you for that. Sorry again. So we'll turn it back over to the committee for questions using a speaker's list. Thank you so much for your time, Peter, and your partner there. So we'll start with Ryan. Any questions? Okay. Mimu?
Thank you. I have no questions. My phone died just now. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Dominique?
No questions.
Dinah?
Yes, I have a question about so you said there are 3 working hydrants in the park?
Yeah, there are 3 hydrants, and I've just stood down the slide deck, but there are 3 spread throughout the park, yes.
Okay, because how many are there that are not working then? Because I know I've walked by a couple that say they are not working hydrants.
We can certainly have a look at that. So I'm not sure if you're referring to one of the yellow ones I've highlighted, or it might be one of the other municipal ones. Is it within the park or around the park?
Yeah, I thought we had, I had heard at a previous meeting that actually none of the fire hydrants were operational. How often are they checked?
So that's actually the purview of Halifax Water, but certainly I've taken a note of that and we'll certainly go back at that. I'm not sure if Ian is aware from an operational perspective as to whether those are operational or how frequently Halifax Water gets in there, but I'll certainly take that one back and get in there and have our crews have a look.
Okay, thank you.
Who was next? Elena?
I have a question. So you mentioned, or you showed a photo in which you said there's lots of dead trees. Is there any plan for those to approach those dead trees, or are we just leaving them?
It's certainly not from a fire perspective. We don't cut down trees. That probably would be a great question for Ian to take a crack at. And some of them, do provide habitat for species, as part of the natural part of the forest. But yeah, I think there has and is a program for forest management within the park, and I think Ian touched on that. And I'll turn over to him to ask that question as to whether those larger trees there's a management plan to attack those.
There's ongoing tree maintenance in the park. So if there's anything dead that's far enough distance from a trail or major roadway or public access, because we don't promote off-trail access in the park unless necessary, we will remove dead or dying and invasive trees that pose a risk, but that's kind of on a case-by-case basis. And depending on the date of the photo that was taken in the PowerPoint that was just given, some of those dead trees may no longer be there, but there's no active seeking of dead trees. It's more so on a day-to-day basis, and when one is seen that poses a risk, it's removed. But anything in the interior is left to nature to take its course, I guess this would be the best way to describe that.
Yeah, fair. I do have a question. You mentioned that back to Peter, you mentioned that there's favorable species, hardwood versus softwood, and that there are recommendations to increase the ratio of hardwood. How has that been going?
Once again, that would be part of an overall forest management strategy that would consider replacing when trees are down or are killed by invasive species, that they be replaced with favorable hardwood species like maples and other hardwoods that are that are more favorable to prevent forestry spread of fire. And I'll let Kara, because she's throwing something in the comments there as well.
Yeah, I was going to type. Yeah, going back to the dead snags that are in the forest, they pose little risk. Like Peter said, they're more beneficial for woodpeckers and owls and small mammals, and we want to promote diversity in the forest. We don't want to just wipe out everything that's dead and dying, because it's part of natural succession in a forest, right? With softwood trees, they have a pitch and resin that acts like gasoline in a sense. So if they were to catch fire and have all those different fuels from the ground to the treetops, they can create an increase in fire behavior and spread of wildfire. So what we want to do is create smaller pockets of those softwood trees. And if we have softwood trees there, even just making sure they're pruned and thinned a certain distance apart, so roughly 8 feet apart with 2 meters up, will reduce any surface fire. So if a cigarette were dropped or a campfire were lit, that these trees would not actually burn. They would the fire would fizzle out and not be an issue.
So that would help with the ladder fires then?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much, you two. No further questions.
The only other thing I would offer is, and perhaps we probably should have put it in our slide deck, is in the post 2023 wildfires in Tantallon, we've invested significantly in a whole lot of new equipment. So we will be adding to our suite of equipment for the next wildland season, hopefully some additional off-road wildland firefighting trucks, reinvesting in a whole lot of forestry pumps to provide water for wildland firefighting, increasing our complement of hose, increasing all the hardware and equipment that comes with that, including the protective equipment for our firefighters. So in the coming year, we will be much better equipped to deal with hopefully not an extreme fire season in 2025.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't have any questions. Councillor White?
Yeah, that was great. I was really glad to hear that there's 3 hydrants in the park as well. I was under the impression we didn't have any, so that's great. And then the other options, you mentioned like the pumping from the pond, the ocean, the porta tank. I feel like I missed one. Is there a fourth option?
Yeah, so it's a hybrid of that. So that was where we use supply hose to go from a hydrant that may be outside the park. We run a 5-inch hose or a 4-inch hose. We have about 2,000 feet of that, and another truck can come with more hose. So we're able to move the water through a supply hose from a hydrant nearby to a place where we'd position a fire truck and use it. So we would call that a relaying of water using hose. So there, as I mentioned, there's the direct use of a hydrant. There's running a supply hose of water. There is using smaller forestry pumps and leveraging the ocean or the ponds. And then, of course, we could, and we likely wouldn't do it in the city, but more of a rural option is setting up those porta tanks, those swimming pools that are like a pond, and we run and use forestry pumps out of those.
Very good, thank you. Maybe just the types of calls. You had 11 calls. What sort of types of calls do you get?
Yeah, I don't have that slide deck right in front of me. There were, I think, 11 year to date, a couple of what we would call legal burns. So those would be fires. They could be youth in the park. They could be someone having a fire in one of the fire pits that is along the shore during a no burn period. So that would be classified as an illegal burn, given the burn state. And then there may be times where outdoor fires are permitted. And then there are investigations where someone from Halifax or elsewhere may see smoke in the park or something and ask us to go and investigate it. So I would suggest that most of those calls, other than the water rescue calls, are probably generally related to concerns related to burning, illegal burning, or someone suspecting that there's a fire in the park.
And there may not be. Okay.
And there may not be.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Great presentation.
No problem. Well, with that, folks, I will say thank you very much for being given the opportunity to make this presentation to the committee, and I look forward to meeting Councillor White in person. It's been a pleasure to meet you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Move on to the next item on our agenda. No added items, I'm told. The date of the next meeting is January 9th, 2025. And I guess now is adjournment. I'll call for a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
I can motion. I can't hear anything.
Okay.
And I'll second, Dinah.
Great. So the meeting is adjourned at 6:21. Thank you for everyone bearing with me as my first time doing this today.